going on, everybody, and welcome to my review of The Crow 2024. As you can see, I don't own a Crow shirt, so the best I could give you is a little Always Sunny fight milk. For bodyguards, by bodyguards.
The first alcoholic, dairy-based protein drink for bodyguards! By bodyguards!
And before we get going, let me just start this review off by admitting to something I hate saying, both in my movie reviews and in my personal life. I made a mistake. I was wrong. There, you happy? I admitted it. I was wrong. Sorry. And for those of you that don't know what I'm referring to, back when I saw this movie in theaters, I did an out-of-theater reaction where I foolishly claimed, I don't think this movie is that bad, and I find the original Crow to be a touch overrated because of the unfortunate circumstances with Brandon Lee passing away.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
And I will say, for the first time in like 15 years, I did rewatch the 94 Crow after seeing this movie in theaters, and that movie's pretty great. That movie just has so much going for it that I don't even know what movie I was watching like 15 years ago when I didn't like it. It has personality, it has atmosphere, it's got some great performances by Brandon Lee, Michael Wincott, and Ernie Hudson. It has a killer soundtrack. You have this deep, dark, gothic setting that almost acts like a character all of its own, and it's just a really solid revenge story. And in that vein, I have rethought my very generous 5 out of 10 I gave this version, and I fully admit, I was wrong. This movie is pretty bad. Now, it's currently sitting at a 4.7 on IMDb, and while a few months ago I would have been in lockstep with that rating, upon reevaluating things, yeah, that feels pretty high. But with that being said, this isn't the absolute worst movie I've ever seen, so I do have a few positives. Let's give this movie a couple flowers before we pretty much destroy it. Bill Skarsgård is a phenomenal actor. Like, I've liked this dude in everything I've seen him in, and I will say I think he continues that in this movie. For what he's given to work with, I think he does pretty good. He gives a pretty convincing performance as like this social outcast, this loner that kind of turned to a life of drugs and partying as like an escape or an outlet. I think he does fine. It's just like, you know, this whole movie around him, but we'll get to that. And while this doesn't nearly live up to the cinematography of the original Crow, I still think this movie has some visual flair going on. Like, you know, it's got some stuff going on. It's not what I would call lazy cinematography. You have a lot of, like, cool drone shots, bird's eye view shots overhead. You have this really creative intro with Eric bathing in the blood in the bathtub. And while I fully admit it's nowhere near the 94 version, I think this movie's still pretty atmospheric. Another positive I can say is I honestly think the second half of this movie is watchable. I mean, it's okay, if not a little generic. Like, from the point you see in the trailer of him getting blasted in the bathtub with the shotgun, from that point, this movie kind of transforms into an okay time. There's a ringing endorsement, huh? As crazy as it sounds, it's almost like audiences wanted more of this Crow action and less of the I'm a misunderstood loner who still gets bullied like I'm in high school. What is this, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man?
My baby! I can't let you in there, the roof is about to collapse! My baby! I can't let you in there, the roof is about to collapse! Baby!
And for my final positive, to go along with my point of the second half of the movie, I mean, being decent, there is a pretty intense, pretty violent scene and just about an hour into this movie. It's another one of these trailer moments with Eric at the opera house, like trying to find the guy responsible for their murders. And this moment is absolutely brutal, easily the most violence we get in this movie. And had you given us more of those moments, I'm willing to bet general movie-going audiences probably would have rated this at least a little bit higher. Like, at the end of the day, if your story sucks, why not lean into the violence and the action a little bit to get a few cheap audience points? But now, it's time to get to the longer portion of the review. Don't really have any mixed in this movie, so we're straight to negatives. And first and foremost, why the hell would you call these characters Eric and Shelley when you could have named them literally anything else? Like, there are so many ways to retell this story, but if you're gonna fundamentally change our two main characters, why not just call them, like, Aaron and Sheila and avoid pissing off an entire fan base? Like, at least a small portion of the hate in this movie could have so easily been avoided, and yet they still opted to call these characters Eric and Shelley. Make no mistake, there is absolutely nothing about these characters that even closely resembles Eric Draven or Shelley Webster. In that original movie, these were two characters that got brutalized and murdered before their wedding night. They weren't two drug addicts breaking out of rehab and starting a toxic relationship. To go right along with that, the pacing of this movie is truly dreadful. And I feel like that's a complaint that people overuse sometimes without really knowing what it means. But this movie is some of the worst pacing I can recall in recent memory. Like, I thought Alien Romulus took a little while to get going, and that was like 15 minutes. If only I knew what I would be watching next. You just have like a ton of important character moments that would, I don't know, maybe help the audience be more invested in the characters, understand some villain motives. And those moments are like blown right by without a second thought. Like literally, it's like Shelley goes to rehab, 2 scenes later they're in love for some reason. And now as a result, the central romance of the movie, it doesn't feel earned, it doesn't feel believable. Like the audience isn't invested in the central romance, they're not invested in these characters because everything just happens too fast. And then they start talking about your power only remains if your love stays true. Like, dude, these people met like a week ago. There's no true love there. My next negative, which kind of goes hand in hand with my last one, and this is just like a cardinal movie making sin in general, but the first 45 to 50 minutes of this movie is fucking boring.
It's boring as shit.
They literally spend the first 45 minutes or so in this movie trying to establish this relationship in what actually feels more like a drug-fueled romantic comedy. And while I do appreciate that it got more screen time than the flashbacks in the original, you don't care about these characters, you don't root for them, so you don't root for the relationship, you just don't really give a shit. In a movie like this, it would kind of help to give us at least one likable character that we can kind of root for. I'm not going out of my way to root for 2 junkies.
Rude!
And something else I have to touch on real quick. This was a huge point of controversy when they showed the trailers. Even after seeing the movie, I hate this design for the Crow. Like, at least story-wise, they tried to explain why he has the tattoos, but people online got this one right. This just feels like a Jared Leto Joker mixed with a little bit of SoundCloud rapper. It's absolutely horrible. And for as good as I think Bill Skarsgård did with what he was given to work with, I think the actress here who played Shelley, FKA Twigs, she was equally as bad. Like, she was on the complete other end of the scale. I don't know what else this actress has done. Maybe she's better in other performances, but she was pretty awful here. And I do admit, the movie did her absolutely no favors. Half of her dialogue, it felt like an edgy 14-year-old was writing for her. Like, she would say stuff throughout the movie like, "Promise me when I'm hard to love me harder."
What's the first thing you liked about me?
I thought that you were quite brilliantly broken.
What the fuck is that? This movie also really did everything in its power to overcomplicate what, at its core, was a pretty simple revenge story. Like, they add a whole new angle in this movie where Shelley has something on her phone of this horrible thing that the villain did, which, by the way, has a terrible payoff at the end of the second act. And you also have Eric and Shelley just making the dumbest fucking decisions when they're fully aware that these people are after Shelley. Like, they want to murder her. And instead of immediately leaving town, they're just hanging out, having a lot of sex, getting tattoos, partying. Like, motherfuckers, you deserve to die. You're stupid. But the biggest sin this movie commits is it just doesn't understand its source material. Like, it misses the entire point. The Crow returns to punish those that have committed horrible crimes against innocent people. I say again, innocent people. Like, do you remember why Eric and Shelley die in the original movie? Because Top Dollar sucks, and they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like a building that he wanted to demolish and take over. Eric and Shelley in this movie, they're not innocent people. They're actually kind of really shitty people. So the entire point, the entire premise of the movie makes no sense. Why would Eric be given a second chance to avenge Hem and Shelley when they're not innocent bystanders? They suck. All right, guys, I suppose I have to stop my ranting about this movie at some point, so we'll call it right there. But overall, having rewatched the original Crow, what started as a movie that I thought was kind of being overblown, being overhated by people, I've now flipped my opinion on that, and I am fully aboard the hate train with this movie. This is basically an embarrassing retelling of a much better paced story with more likable characters from 1994. But I will say, if you can struggle through like the first 50 minutes or so, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but if you can struggle through that, there is a little bit of violent fun to be had in the second half, even if it feels a little bit generic. I'm gonna give The Crow 2024 a 3.5 out of 10. And while I'm never the guy to advise you not to watch a movie just because I didn't like it, I will say if you're like a Crow superfan, the original movie, I probably wouldn't recommend this movie for you. If we're being honest, it's probably just gonna piss you off. Alright guys, but that is gonna do it for this one. As always, drop the comments down below. Let me know what you thought of this movie. Are you one of the select few who actually enjoyed this reimagining, this retelling, our new Eric and Shelley, some of the new directions they took with this movie? Or are you kind of in the majority here where you saw this as an absolutely dreadful remake? But other than that, do all the YouTube stuff. Leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed this review. Drop the comments down below. Maybe you can sway me back to the dark side on this movie, although I highly doubt it. Subscribe right over here so you don't miss any future content on the channel. And as always, we'll see you in the next one. Fight milk.
I drink it every morning so I can fight like a crow.